There's a particular kind of tension many neurodivergent people live with, but rarely name. It's that sense of having to exist in two realities at the same time. There's the internal one, how you actually think, feel, and communicate. And then there's the external one, the version of you that you're constantly managing for other people's comfort. That split, that awareness of self layered over with constant self-monitoring, is what I'm talking about today. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist. Sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois first described this phenomenon as double consciousness in the context of race. He was writing about what it means to be Black in a white-dominated society, to have to see yourself not only through your own eyes, but also through the distorted lens of how the dominant culture sees you. And I think this framework speaks just as powerfully to the neurodivergent experience. Because if you're autistic or ADHD, or both, you probably know what it's like to keep tabs on how you're coming across. You're interpreting the moment while also preemptively translating yourself for someone else. You're reading them while wondering how they're reading you. You're trying to show up while expecting others to suddenly lash out. That dual awareness is what happens when the world keeps telling you, directly or indirectly, that your natural way of existing doesn't quite cut it. So you become fluent in both worlds. You speak neurodivergent and neurotypical. You notice the pause in someone's voice, the shift in tone, the eyebrow twitch, and your brain starts calculating. Was that too blunt? Should I explain what I meant? Did I miss a cue? All while still struggling to finish the sentence you were trying to say. This hyper-awareness is spun up by years of being misread and misunderstood, and it leaves us caught in the middle, knowing exactly who you are, but constantly adjusting for how the world might respond. And when you live like that long enough, it becomes hard to tell what's real. Is this how I would naturally respond? Or is this the version of me I've been trained to perform? That's what I mean when I say double consciousness. This double consciousness, this split in how we experience ourselves versus how we have to show up, doesn't just drop into our lives fully formed. Usually it builds long before we know we're autistic or ADHD. It starts with moments that seem small, but land hard. You ask a question and someone laughs at you. You say something totally sincere and they call it awkward. You cry when the classroom noise gets too loud and they call it drama. You blurt out an idea mid-conversation and someone tells you to stop interrupting. No one explains what you did wrong, just that you were too much or not enough or somehow both. So you start paying attention not just to what people say, but how they say it. You memorize the pauses, the phrases, the expressions that seem to work. You start editing yourself mid-sentence, second-guessing your tone, your volume, your body language. Because somewhere along the line, you realized your instincts can't be trusted. Not in this world. And that's where the split begins, where you started internalizing the idea that your natural way of thinking, speaking, feeling needs constant correction. So you developed a kind of internal interpreter, this filter that runs between your brain and your mouth, or between your feelings and your face. It tries to help, it tries to keep you safe, but it's also the thing that starts to drown you. Because now, every moment is double-coded. The genuine you is still there, but layered over with performance, strategy, emotional labor. And if you grew up without language for your neurodivergence, without validation, without anyone telling you that your brain wasn't broken, then this performance becomes the default. You don't even realize you're doing it. You just assume you're the problem, that you're weird or wrong or fundamentally off in a way you can't name. And that belief becomes the voice in your head, the inner critic who pre-rejects you before anyone else gets the chance. You're going to mess this up. Don't say anything, you always sound strange. Why are you like this? That voice came from a world that kept telling you to shrink, to tone it down, to smooth it out, to match the shape of people who were never trying to understand you. There's a common myth that autistic people or ADHDers just don't get other people, that we're bad at empathy, that we can't read emotions or don't care about how others feel, or lack some fundamental piece of social wiring. And I want to name that for what it is, a one-sided misreading. Because when our way of expressing emotion or interpreting others doesn't match neurotypical norms, both sides wind up confused. That is what's called the double empathy problem. a concept coined by autistic researcher Damian Milton. It's the idea that the communication breakdown between neurodivergents and neurotypicals is a mutual mismatch. We speak different emotional dialects. Neurotypicals often rely on subtext, on body language, on signals that aren't said out aloud. Autistics tend to speak more directly, we value clarity, we say what we mean. ADHDers might jump between thoughts, speak impulsively, interrupt. But instead of meeting that difference with curiosity or flexibility, neurotypical culture often pathologizes it. If you don't respond the way they expect, if your face doesn't match the tone they were looking for, or if you offer a solution instead of sympathy, they assume you don't care. Or worse, that you're cold, rude, inappropriate. And then the burden of repair falls on us. We're the ones who have to explain what we meant. We're the ones clarifying our tone, softening our words, backtracking to reassure the other person that no, we weren't trying to be mean or difficult or intense. Meanwhile, how often are they doing the same thing for us? How often are they thinking, wait, maybe I misunderstood their emotional language. Maybe I should ask, not assume. Rarely. And that's the problem. Because when only one side is being asked to translate, to adjust, to apologize, that side is doing most of the emotional labor. That labor is draining, but so is the implication that our way of caring, connecting, or existing doesn't count unless it looks like theirs. That our intentions don't matter unless we deliver them in the right package. That we have to be constantly on guard, not just to communicate, but to preempt misunderstanding and then fix it while managing the other person's feelings. The sense of obligation to repair may start when someone's tone shifts, their expression changes, they get quiet. Your brain kicks into high gear. What did I say? Did that land wrong? Are they mad? Do I need to fix this before it gets worse? Now you're replaying the entire conversation in your head like security footage, scrubbing back through every word, every moment, looking for what you missed. Then comes the rumination. You lie awake at night, spiraling through what you should have said. You reword that sentence 5 different ways. You draft the message in your head, but don't send it. You wonder if you should even bring it up. You wonder if not bringing it up will make things worse. And underneath all that analysis is one core fear. They're going to see me wrong, and I won't get the chance to explain who I actually am. And then you do explain. You over-explain. You message them to clarify your tone. You try to take responsibility even when it's unclear what went wrong. And often, you're not just managing the misunderstanding, you're managing their emotional response too. You're trying to soothe their discomfort while downplaying your own. You might even end up apologizing for your intentions because the dynamic makes it feel like you have to. Because if you don't, the risk is that they'll pull away or get angry or label you as too hard to deal with. And so the emotional labor piles up. It becomes your job to scan the room, to predict how your words might land, to bend your communication style in 100 small ways just to avoid being misunderstood again. And here's the part no one says out loud. We do all of this while still carrying our own nervous system, our own executive dysfunction, our own rejection sensitivity, our own history of being misread, blamed, or left behind. That is the cost of living in a world that treats neurotypical perception as the only valid one. We have to narrate our experience, defend it, apologize for it, package it into something less likely to provoke confusion or rejection. That's code switching, emotional translation work, unpaid, often unacknowledged, and unreciprocated. And it leaves so many of us wondering, if I stopped repairing every misunderstanding, if I stopped cushioning every interaction, would anyone still choose to understand me? There's a cost to all of this, to double consciousness, to the constant repair work that's required, to being the interpreter in every room you enter. And the cost is both tiredness and the slow erosion of your sense of self. When you're always adjusting how you speak, how you move, how you react, you start to lose track of what was natural in the first place. Was that my actual reaction, or was that the version of me I've practiced because it's safer? Am I quiet right now because I'm content, or because I'm bracing for judgment if I show up fully? Am I being accommodating, or am I people-pleasing to avoid being labeled too much again? And when the default is to constantly anticipate others, what they expect, what might upset them, what they'll assume, you end up living in reaction to everyone else. And where does that leave you? Burnt out, anxious, disconnected from your own preferences, limits, and needs. This is what many of us call neurodivergent burnout, depletion at the identity level. You overfunction in social situations just to keep the peace. You explain your tone, your facial expression, your need for space, and then you come home and collapse, unable to do even basic tasks because the energy it took to perform acceptability already emptied your tank. And still, the inner critic chimes in. You should have handled that better. Why can't you just act normal? Maybe they wouldn't have been upset if you were easier to talk to. This inner critic is built from a lifetime of being misunderstood, corrected, or told that your instincts can't be trusted. So you start assuming you're wrong before anyone else says so. You start to shrink your needs to avoid being a burden. You give more and more and more, hoping it'll protect you from rejection, even if it never actually has, until there's nothing left over for you. Not your joy, your growth, not your rest. And even when you find people who don't expect all that labor from you, sometimes you're used to doing it, full stop. And even when you find people who don't expect all that labor from you, sometimes you're too used to doing it to stop. Because the fear of being misunderstood, or worse, abandoned, still lives in your nervous system. Let's pause here because I want to say something clearly. We all deserve to be understood, not just tolerated or managed or politely ignored while others wait for you to finish speaking. We deserve to be understood. Your communication style, your way of thinking, feeling, or relating, it's not defective. It's merely different, and that difference isn't a problem. The problem is when you are asked to adjust, when only you are expected to translate, to guess what someone else meant while also preemptively fixing how they might take what you said. Because communication is supposed to be mutual. Understanding is supposed to be a shared responsibility. And when you're neurodivergent, you're often the one doing all the heavy lifting, trying to stay one step ahead of being seen as rude, cold, scattered, inappropriate. And that's not fair. You deserve relationships, professional, social, romantic, whatever, where people will make an effort to meet you halfway, where they ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions, where they learn your communication rhythms instead of expecting you to perform theirs, where curiosity replaces criticism. We all miscommunicate sometimes, but if you're always the one absorbing the discomfort, if you're always the one changing shape to keep things smooth, that's a double standard. So let me say this again. You deserve to exist in relationships where your honesty is welcomed, not punished, where your silence isn't assumed to mean disinterest, where your enthusiasm isn't taken as too much. You shouldn't have to choose between being known and being safe. And if you've been living in that double bind, if you've spent years trying to earn understanding by becoming more manageable, I hope you hear this as permission to stop. So if all of this sounds familiar, if you've been living with this split awareness, always managing how you're seen while trying to stay true to yourself, let's talk just briefly about what might help. Here are a few starting points. Name the labor. Just putting language to what you've been carrying makes a difference. This is me over-explaining because I've been misread before. This is me preparing for someone else's reaction, even though I don't actually know what they're thinking. This is emotional labor I didn't choose. Naming it gives it shape. It reminds you this is work. No wonder I'm tired. Pause before you rush to repair. Not every misunderstanding needs to be immediately smoothed over. You are allowed to take a breath, to wait, to check in with yourself before checking in with the other person. That urgency to fix, to clarify, to self-blame, it comes from old patterns, but you don't have to follow it every time. Challenge the inner critic gently. That voice that says, you blew it, you're too much, you're probably mad, that voice is trying to protect you, but it's using strategies built from harm. You can start to push back. What if I didn't mess that up? What if they're not angry? What if I'm allowed to exist even if I said the wrong thing? Seek out reciprocal relationships. Find people who don't need you to shrink. People who don't flinch at stimming or need your tone to be just right before they take you seriously. People who aren't waiting for you to fail the social test. Those people exist, and you deserve to be known what it feels like to be met without bending. Rest. Seriously. Rest from being interpreted. Rest from always being on. Rest from checking yourself every 5 seconds. So if you've ever explained yourself 10 different ways and still felt like no one really got it, If you've ever walked out of a room and spent the rest of your day wondering what you did wrong, just know you're not alone. You're navigating a world that wasn't designed to recognize your clarity, your directness, your sensitivity, your speed, your depth. And none of that makes you wrong. And you deserve space, ease, and to be understood without having to translate yourself. If this video resonated, please like, subscribe, and share. It helps other neurodivergents find and benefit from my content. Also, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What parts of this feel familiar? What kind of understanding do you wish you'd received earlier? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.